more in. Our topic today is on inclusivity, on making our classes a more inclusive experience such that every student who is there has a sense of being recognized, appreciated, and supported in their practice. And I'll suggest a variety of ways that we can get at that. And with that, I'm going to start to dive sort of right into it by, oops, there's a cat on my screen. There he goes. So let me suggest that all of our classes, all styles, all levels of classes will have a diverse array of people in them. Diverse in terms of their conditions, their intentions. Ideally, their intentions are somewhat informed by their conditions. Diverse backgrounds, diverse languages, diverse body types. There's a rich array of students in all of our classes. Many classes are taught in a bit of a cookie cutter fashion. For example, even within even across styles, that is, within a style, it's often one specific way that a posture or breathing technique, mostly postures, but the various things that we're teaching is usually one specific way that they're presented. And often it's a very effective way of presenting it to some people, to some learners, to some people with certain conditions, intentions, backgrounds, and everything else. So to make our classes fully inclusive, we need to take a sort of step back a little bit and ask some deeper questions about how can we hold the space? How can we hold the space in a way that allows every student in that class to feel more recognized, more supported in their practice? I'm going to go through, I'm going to refer to it as sort of 5 areas. I'm going to refer to them as the 5 L's. I wish they were I's. I thought of I words, but it didn't work. The 5 L's, as in the letter L, of making our classes inclusive. And so the first of those is one of my areas of my own challenge, difficulties often in teaching yoga, which I've been doing for 28 years or something. It's still my, I think, number one challenge. And you're already experiencing it, I think, especially if you don't speak English as your first language. And that has to do with the first L, that is language. And my challenge is that I tend to speak too quickly. Right now, becoming more aware of it, I'm slowing down. I'm also now beginning to enunciate the final consonant of each word. And for some who live, say, here in Santa Cruz, it might sound like more labored speech. But for others who might live in other parts of the world, don't speak English as their first language, and just simply have a different relationship to the verbal landscape or audioscape, when I slow down, it enables them to hear me. And so I also think that our words are precious. We only have so much time in a class, and we want to do our very best to be able to convey to our students all that we possibly can, our verbal cues being an important part of this. And when we slow it down, it's one of those less is more truisms. So with language, there are other aspects of it as well. And one has to do with, do you have a class, or are your classes generally mostly native speakers or non-native speakers? So that is native to your own language. I travel a lot. And one of the places I've most learned the importance of slowing down is when I'm teaching in a country, in a community where English, my native language, is not their native language. And this involves more than just slowing down. There's also a recognition that different slang terms and turns of phrase that we have that might seem altogether natural to you among your friends, your community, your family, might not be understandable, translatable to others. So having some just greater awareness of how we can use language in basic ways is really helpful. 2 other aspects of language I want to highlight. And they're really in the same category of inclusivity. And that is, we want to, I think, as yoga teachers, develop stronger and deeper connections with our students. And this really is essential in developing trust with our students, mutual trust, and especially our students trusting us, so that they can maybe even more easily trust themselves as we're encouraging them, suggesting to them doing certain things in a class, guiding them in their practice. I know a fair bit about anatomy, and I also know a fair bit of Sanskrit. I could, not easily, but I could teach a class just speaking what I call anatomies in Sanskrit, and I would turn off most of my students. I could describe to you that I'm sitting here rooting through my ischial tuberosities and using my erector spinae muscles along with my transverse abdominis and blah, blah, blah muscles to elongate my spine. And I've just lost many people by virtue of using that kind of language. We want, as best we can, to speak in the simplest terms. And so when I suggest drawing the arms up level with the floor, what I don't suggest is abducting the arms to 90 degrees. If I'm doing a teacher workshop, I might do that, especially if I'm teaching anatomy. I would very much use anatomies more in such a class to help those students learn more of that language. And similarly, if I'm doing a bhakti class and we're chanting Om Namah Shivaya Shivaya Namaha, then of course there's Sanskrit in there. But generally, I keep my Sanskrit to a minimum. And especially in regular classes, not teacher classes, but in teacher classes where Sanskrit starts to become more of the common language. That is, when you travel, if you do travel the world, or you take workshops online from anyone anywhere in the world, you'll find that in many teacher workshops that Sanskrit is used widely. And sometimes that can be very intimidating. In my own teacher trainings and other workshops for teachers where I do use Sanskrit, I always use the English language term that is related to it. There are only a few exceptions to that. Terms that in Sanskrit have entered at least the English language, I'll suggest other language lexicons. For example, chaturanga. I think that chaturanga, the full description, full name of the posture is, the asana is chaturanga dandasana. I think that more people in the world who do yoga understand what chaturanga means than if you were to say, please come into four-limb staff pose. Four-limb staff pose, what's that? Chaturanga, four-limb. Similarly, Shavasana, I think most would probably get, corpse pose, but I think that Shavasana is another one that's pretty widely universally understood. But then you come even to certain basic postures like Tadasana, and I think that many students don't know what the term means. And we want always to understand or appreciate rather these qualities of language in relationship to our community and our own classes. And so you might simply find that where you live, that it makes more sense in your community to use words like mountain pose, warrior pose, than Tadasana and Virabhadrasana. And so it goes. How much do you use anatomy, technical anatomy terms? How much do you use Sanskrit terms? And how much do you use other technical terms? These are factors that relate to how comfortable and included students will feel in a class. There's one other element of this, I think it's a really important one in many communities, and that is the use of pronouns. And so I remember back years ago in college, in university, many years ago, where all the textbooks were written with he this and he that, history, not herstory. It just everything was he. And then, of course, we came to through the women's movement, the feminist movement, to increasingly appreciating this, his and her, or her and his, and thus even in books such that I write, there's that inclusivity that we have with that gendered aspect of pronouns, which leaves some not feeling included because of matters of gender identity. So where you go with this, I want to suggest in all of what I'm suggesting, there's an overarching principle or value, and that is really to thine own self be true. And be true to yourself and honoring your own sense of all of these aspects of sort of cultural life, and consider the relative ease of simply saying, using more neutral pronouns, such as telling a story and talking about they, them, and their, rather than he, him, and his, or something to that effect. Again, I leave that to where, to thine own self be true, especially considering that there's diversity of opinion about these things across the yoga community. Okay, so the first L of 5 L's of basic ways of making our classes more inclusive. The first one regards language. Another regards learning styles. And so it's been a long time, a couple of generations now, since Howard Gardner wrote a big important set of papers, a Harvard University education theorist, about theories of multiple intelligence. And of course, that field has really developed a lot since then. And the idea of not just multiple intelligences, but very different ways that different ones of us learn. And I will suggest to you that there is an aspect of a yoga class in which, well, it's a class, that there's learning occurring. And so in learning, I think ideally to really make our students all feel equally engaged, that we need to, it's important for us, it's important for us to offer inclusive teaching styles, pedagogical tools. And so, for example, then teaching a yoga posture, we certainly start with our voice, and I'll come back in a moment to when that doesn't matter at all. There are certain situations when things like voice, well, I'll just tell you now, when is voice irrelevant? When you're teaching to a group of deaf students. And similarly, when I get to visual learners, visual demonstration is irrelevant when teaching to blind students, which I've done at the Braille Institute in Los Angeles 25 years ago. And I presently have a student in a teacher training program who teaches blind students. So that matters. So coming back around, reeling in on that a little bit. Learning styles are important to appreciate. And so generally we can recognize that there are some basic ways that people often best learn. One of them is verbal learners. And that is the learner I'm most easily addressing right now, because what I'm presenting with you now is my voice. I'm not doing much aside from gesticulation with my hands and arms. I'm not doing much with visual demonstration. But when I'm teaching a postural yoga class, I'm on my mat part of the time. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. Part of the time, not all the time, relating to learning styles and guiding students in their practice. And I'm giving visual demonstrations. So clear enunciation, describing to our students with clear, understandable, translatable, comprehensible language is really important for the verbal learner. But sometimes you can talk until, we say in English at least, you're blue in the face, and some students just don't understand you, and you say, well, this, and they go, why didn't you say so? And you're like, well, I've been saying so. And so here we are. Some students learn best visually. And I'll come back to giving some points about visual demonstration in a moment. And then another learning sort of style, if you will, is tactile. There are many people who learn best by feeling it, including particularly feeling it within their own body, but also tactile in the sense of how one as a yoga teacher might, depending on the appropriateness of it in a particular environment class, give hands-on cues, that is touch to do something. So for instance, encouraging a student to sit tall, to raise their head towards the sky or whatever, something like that. Well, I wouldn't clasp their head and lift it up. I might place my hand here and say something like, may I place my hand on top of your head? And if they say yes, they press into my hand. So they're feeling it from the inside, not just me doing it to them. And so it goes with most cueing with my hands or feet or whatever it is, using my body with their body to give them guidance in ways where they're taking the initiative, they're making the action happen, not just me manipulating them. But the underlying point of that is that tactile aspects of learning are important for many people. And then another is experiential. Now, I think we'll suggest that mostly all of us have most of all of these qualities that come about in our learning, but without question, some have greater qualities of visual learning mechanisms than they do qualities than they do of, say, verbal. And so it goes. And thus the importance then in guiding the class to blend these together in clear and methodical ways. When I am teaching a posture, whatever that posture happens to be, I do my very best to be giving a visible visual demonstration. And by being visible, that means standing in the room in a place where as many students as possible can see me, and super important, that I can also see them, such that I can get a sense of whether my verbal and visual cues are effective, they're getting through. Often I'm giving the verbal and the visual at the same, when I'm giving them, generally at the same time, I'm watching, getting immediate feedback. That is, what are my students doing? Are they coming along with me? And if they are not, it's a suggestion to, well, maybe back off or give some other clearer cues about whatever it is that I'm suggesting. And so then with the visual demonstrations, I would suggest that it's helpful to most students to give a little bit of an announcement for your auditables, those who can hear at least, to say what we're about to do. For example, preparing for triangle pose, preparing for a handstand, or preparing for whatever it is, or moving on to this or that, whatever it is, just that brief moment of giving them a signal of what's going to happen so their brain is a little more prepared for receiving the information about to come about whatever that is. So I'm continuing to speak, I'm giving a verbal cue, and along with it, I'm giving a visual demonstration. It makes very little sense to me to ever demonstrate a posture in the middle of the room unless everyone's gathered around in workshop style. Because if I'm in the middle of the room giving a demonstration, half the room can't see me and I can't see the other half. So it's really important, I'll suggest, to be mobile as a teacher. Generally, we're up on our mat at the front of the room. But if you have for a moment your class turned to the side of the room, there are lots of postures where you can best demonstrate from a different point in the room. It's important for us as yoga teachers to get off our mat. That safe zone, especially for newer teachers or those experienced teachers who've habitually gotten stuck there. There's a habit now. They can't get off their mat. Get off your mat to be able to give the demonstration where they can see you and you can see them. And that involves, again, being mobile as a yoga teacher. Now, another really important, and by the way, if you can, I think there's a lot of value in mirroring. So as I say, turn your right foot out, I turn my left foot out. So it's as though my students are looking into a mirror. And I've surveyed thousands of students around this over the years. And while some teachers say, oh no, it confuses my students, what I find more generally is that it does not, is that it helps students to have that mirroring. And it's difficult to develop the skill for some people, for some teachers to develop that skill. I've had students in my teacher trainings write the letter R on their left foot and L on their right foot. I've so embodied the mirroring thing is that now I come to a stop sign and it says no right turn, and I need to pause for a moment and think no right turn because I've kind of switched them somewhat dyslexically in my brain. But anyway, the point is mirroring is also a very helpful part of visual demonstration. Next with this is that the moment your visual demonstration has achieved its basic goal, that is, your students have made the transition, they're in the basic form that you have suggested, it is now, I think, really important, unless you think that your continued positioning there is beneficial to them, to see you, for example, again, in triangle pose, let's say you're there for a minute. At what point in that minute is it not so helpful, important for them, or helpful, beneficial to your students to be looking at you, as opposed to, say, tuning in inside, perhaps looking somewhere else, like at a drishti point, their thumb, or across the room so it's easier on their neck, or whatever it is. The point is that the moment that your visual demonstration has gotten your students, along with your verbal cues, into the basic form, I suggest it's time to get off your mat, away from where you were, and get out there in order to get a 360-degree perspective on your students, to move around and see them, appreciate them from different vantage points. And based on that, give refining cues that use your verbal, and sometimes standing in front of a particular student, your visual, and sometimes with permission with that student and a sense of appropriateness of it, giving with your hands, cueing tactile guidance to your students. We move along. Let's see. Okay. Every yoga class is a multi-level class. Now, take a class that's described as level 1, whether it's whatever it is, level 1 hatha, level 1 vinyasa, level 1 hot, what doesn't matter. It's described as level 1. Or on a scale of 1 to 3, it's described as level 3 vinyasa. I guarantee you that every so-called level class will have a diverse array of abilities in that class. Students who are relatively adept with the various postures in that class. And some might be much more adept with some than they are with others. That is, in any given class, every yoga class, I should say, is truly a multi-level class. And that makes it incumbent upon us as yoga teachers to meet and greet that aspect of diversity in our classes and address the different abilities within a class. And again, I would suggest that for any given student, with some exceptions, that diversity of ability varies a lot. You'll certainly have occasionally in some classes, maybe all your classes, some students with fantastic athletic, gymnastic, acrobatic ability and flexibility and all, and they can do just about anything, everything. In fact, the first time they came to yoga, they were doing one-handed handstands with their legs behind their back. And then, well, I'll say there's the other 99% of people who come to yoga classes, more diverse in their conditions with strength and flexibility, balance, neuromuscular control, and other qualities in the physical aspect of the practice, as well as the breathing and presence of mind aspects of practice. There's tremendous diversity. So in a multi-level class, and let's just come just to basically teaching asana to start with, so postural practice, in teaching a class with different people in it, unless it's, again, a private class, it's important, I think, to give a way of moving into the asanas, and then once in them, exploring within those asanas, and then in getting ready to come out of that asana, transitioning out of those asanas in ways that meet and greet the conditions of the students in that class. And this invites us to teach asanas, I'll suggest, especially the transitions into them, in state, what I'll refer to as stages. And without overstating this idea, I'll suggest that with certain postures is the idea of sort of the full expression of an asana. I'm going to put I think you can see my screen, I hope so, a picture up here. It's a cover of a book I happen to have sitting here from a talk the other day. And it's from a Yoga for Big Bodies book. And so here you have a student, a teacher, she wrote the book, with her foot placed where? Well, actually it's against her knee. I don't think it's a very good idea to have that heel against the knee. But the point is that she's on the path towards a tree pose. And the full expression, this is what I want to be careful not to overstate, the full expression of tree, some would suggest, is where that foot is not against the knee or the lower leg or the ankle, but all the way up into the inner thigh. And so it goes with, say, and also the palms she has here, I would call that maybe not full expression of tree pose. The arms are fully up overhead, fully flexed, if those are you anatomies people. So the point of this is that with any given asana, we can find what we would describe as the full expression of it. There are pictures of those full expressions in places like BKS Iyengar's Light on Yoga from 1966, one of the definitive works on yoga in a couple of generations ago, really. And then Yoga Journal magazine, somewhat codified form and nomenclature, naming the postures, really in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, so that everyone can, like, when we talk about triangle pose, we would know what we're talking about. It's like, here's triangle pose, or whatever, here's tree pose. And so the full expression of the asana is that form that you would see there. I would suggest that, and it's a judgmental term in a way, because this picture here, she's in a tree pose. It's tree pose. Full expression is, again, a little bit judgmental. So how we approach that with language, we might not say full expression, but rather moving to a place for your tree pose, and in doing so, to teach it in stages. And so with tree, you might start with suggesting foot to lower ankle, foot to lower leg, foot to inner thigh, if available, and perhaps hands stay on hips, perhaps palms to heart, perhaps arms overhead. So in doing this, I'm including everyone, because there are many students in the class who will not get their foot to their inner thigh in tree pose. There are many students in triangle pose who will not place their hand where you think it's supposed to be placed in your style or tradition of yoga. Iyengar people, that hand is straight down, perhaps on a block. Ashtangis pull up on the big toe. Para yoga people and others in the new waves of yoga have the hand in space, a la Bikram. It's where it came from, the hand in space form of triangle pose. And so wherever that hand is, though, you might have a preconceived idea that is the full expression of where the hand is. Well, does that work for everyone? And so teaching the posture in a way, and I'll just go right to triangle pose here, just show you how I might do this. I might suggest bringing your feet apart about the length of one of your legs, más o menos, more or less. So it's okay on people's inner thighs. They feel stable. Turning one foot out, keeping active through the legs. I'm including everyone. I'm facing my class, arms out level with the floor. And then I would suggest looking over your left fingertips. Unless you have neck issues, look forward or over your right fingertips. Why? Because if you're looking over those fingertips, your gaze is already up when you come into the pose. If you have neck issues, you're looking forward, it's easier on the neck, or even easier yet for some to drop their head down. So I'm speaking too quickly. By virtue of giving these options here and now, I'm already being more inclusive. And we start to reach out. And where does that hand go? Well, I would suggest it goes in stages. How far? I'm observing my class. And based on what I'm seeing, the immediate feedback I'm getting, I'm giving further cues, staging my students little by little towards the full expression of the asana. Let's say it happens fairly quickly in some classes. Within a phase of breath, there we are. Here we are now in triangle pose. Now what? And so I want to continue to give refining cues, help guiding my students in ways that they might deepen the practice. And along with that, I'm also sprinkling in suggestions about how they might go the other way. There's this idea in the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, it's one of the yamas, it's called aparigraha, meaning non-grasping, non-covetousness. And in a world where a lot of people are really competitive, but others are often very timid, it's a little tricky about how we guide students in ways where they are honoring their conditions and honoring their intentions and practicing in a way that makes sense for them in that moment, giving their students encouragement, the space to back off. So ask themselves, always consider the question of how far do we need to go? Like, what's the point in some cases of some of the, let's frankly call it contortionism that we find in yoga? We might consider that sometimes it's good to back off. And so giving those cues amidst the exploration of a held asana, like a triangle or whatever it is beneficial, including to those who can go farther, giving them the permission, even the encouragement to sometimes back off, if only to better, more easily, more clearly discover all of what's going on, such that when they perhaps do go farther, they go farther from a better foundation of self-understanding through what they're doing and feeling in their body. So going a little bit further with this then, along with stages, then I'm cueing along the way modifications of the form, different ways of doing the posture. And if it's it's an extended side angle pose, we might be in warrior two to start with. And I suggest, reaching out, go elongate, get as long as you can there. Bring your elbow to your knee, your hand to your hip. And perhaps some of you, and then I teach the upper arm, for example, and explaining external rotation and drawing the arm overhead, or not, and then offering perhaps hand to a block, fingertips, perhaps the outside of the foot, perhaps all the way down, perhaps over time, wrapping, clasping. So what am I done there? I went through multiple stages, from a modified form, elbow on knee, to a modified form, hand on block, fingertips, one could say is still not full expression, hand on the outside of the foot. But when we say that from the beginning, a lot of students are like, oh my God, no, I'm going to do the full expression. I'm here for the whole experience. And they often go, I'll suggest, too far for their body. And so going in stages and encouraging, staying in the place that makes sense for someone in that moment, from what they feel, and sometimes from what you observe, and you suggest to them, you might be more comfortable, more sustainable in this form. Along the way, we're offering, again, modification and use of props. And once into that basic fuller expression, refining cues, deepening cues, and going beyond that, as I showed you a moment ago, offering variation, such as wrapping and clasping. And there's an infinite potential for what such variations could be. And we see this in today's just vast creativity that we're seeing in the yoga realm, where people are coming up with new and different ideas all the time about the fantastic ways that they can arrange their their body in a yoga practice. I'm not sure it's always healthy or wise to do a lot of what we see, but I love the playfulness in it all. So where are we? Language matters. Learning styles matter. Levels matter. Again, I know that's an abstraction to be sure. A level. We're all human, rich, diverse beings. In all of that, with the stages and all, and with where we go, how far we go, the use of props, the exploration of variations, a term that's become one of my most common terms in my teaching these days is to play with it. Not just play the edge, that essential concept from Joel Kramer's 1977 article, A New Look at Yoga, a 1978 article, Yoga Journal magazine, when it was a teacher's magazine. What was it called? 1978. Yoga as Self-Transformation. He introduced the concept of playing the edge, highlighted in Eric Schiffman's book from 1996, Yoga, the Spiritual Practice of Moving into Stillness. Eric, my first teacher in the early 90s, and my own work and others teaching playing the edge. Well, let's go beyond playing the edge and let's play with everything. Not to be not serious about our practice, but to encourage our students to explore within their own experience what it's like to do more of this or more of that, or less of this or less of that, or introduce for themselves new and different ways. And, sometimes I see students doing these kinds of things. I go, careful for a moment. Ideally, as a yoga teacher, we're learning more and more about what works, what doesn't work. That's called anatomy and biomechanics and kinesiology and other sort of insights into how these bodies work and maybe sometimes don't work so well. And so when we're seeing these new fantastic ways of varying it all, the playfulness, including with the emergence of new styles of yoga where there's tremendous playfulness in it all, we might take a pause and go, let's take a close look at that. When I do see new things in my classes, students trying this or that, or they ask me about it, whether in a class or a teacher training or whatever, I do my best to understand it then and there. And I almost always say, well, I need to go home to my laboratory right here and get on this mat and explore it, play with it, see what it feels like in my body, and then try it out, check it out with a few students in classes or students I know well, and get a sense from them of what's it different, diverse students. What's it like for them? And go, okay, here's kind of what I think about it, but not to take away from the playfulness. I think it's really important. Okay, going farther. Then, so language, learning styles, levels. There's another thing that I think is really important. We live in a pretty stressed out world. I mean, or if not a stressed out world, we live in a world in which there's a lot of stress. And I'll suggest that many people come to yoga primarily motivated by stress in their lives. And indeed, as yoga has entered the cultural mainstream, we now see, recommendations coming from all over the institutions of modern society, where when people are stressed out, whether it's in a hospital or at a school or in a business place, a workplace, you might hear someone say, oh, try a yoga class. It's become culturally mainstream. And there's no question that yoga can reduce stress. I think it's one of its greatest promises is to reduce stress. I think there are a vast array of other promises, of course. But I think that reducing stress is a big one. Well, this is different. This is worth kind of exploring here a little bit. That is the idea of santosha, another concept from Buddhist sources, but eventually in Yoga Sutra Patanjali, it's like niyama, santosha, contentment. How do we get content when we're really stressed out? We find pathways to get there. We find sequences of actions, of posture and breathing and other things that we can do to reduce that stress and be more present and joyful in it all. And that's what I really want to go into a little bit here, is the idea of the fourth L being levity. That I want to be careful with this, because I appreciate that we're not looking to just have a comedy show in our classes, not by any means, I'll suggest. That could be problematic for lots of reasons, let's say. But indeed, well, there's a certain seriousness about it. And also appreciate that if we do make our classes purely just about fun or say happy yoga, that could be not so inclusive of someone who's coming to class and carrying something really heavy. They've just lost a loved one. Their cat ran away. Their dog, they've had something traumatic happen in their life. They're just in a pensive mood. They're just feeling down in this moment. And to say, oh, just perk up, be happy, can be a little bit kind of insensitive, if not offensive in certain situations. People are going through a lot. And so on the one hand, we want to appreciate and recognize and be supportive of that, of the difficulties that people very much might be having in their lives, and at the same time have a certain quality of levity in a class, even playing with things that sort of induce that levity. Now, there's a wonderful book out there, by the way, by Steve Ross. He's one of the other first teachers I ever had. He was the very first teacher I took class with. And on January 1st of 1991, it was Steve Ross at Yoga Works in Santa Monica. And Steve was, frankly, hilarious. He brought levity into his classes. He almost wore it on his sleeve, cracking jokes. He's one of the first to play music in classes, and it wasn't Indian ragas. He was playing popular music, rock and roll. He used to back up Lindsey Buckingham as a guitarist. He was a musician and a yogi. So Steve Ross wrote a book titled Happy Yoga. I recommend the book, Happy Yoga by Steve Ross. But we want to, I think, calibrate this. There are various things that we can do in class to allow levity. One of them that also is about our students trusting us is to have a little bit of sometimes self-effacing humor, especially if we make an error in a class, like you forgot to teach both sides of that posture, or whatever it is, you misspoke in some other way, like describe tree pose as chaturanga, whatever it happens to be. Having the confidence in ourselves, the self-acceptance within us, our own self-acceptance in such a way that we can laugh at ourselves, it usually breaks down barriers with our students and makes it easier on them to be in the room feeling levity. There are also postures you can do that can bring about, or activities in a class that you can do that bring about greater levity. There's an abdominal core practice. It's kind of related to happy baby. Like you might imagine that your class is in a happy baby and they're holding their feet or something like this. Well, so ask them to let go and then slowly bicycle their legs in one way, and at the same time try to bicycle their arms in the opposite way, which is almost impossible for some, like rubbing your hand and tapping your head at the same time. And so happy baby. So not to encourage them necessarily to laugh, but then you suggest something like, imagine that you're an infant in a crib playing with a mobile overhead. Well, the difficulty, the challenge of making these movements, and plus this kind of socially weird, awkward form of being in a happy baby anyway in a class, which, by the way, the original name of that posture was not happy baby. It was dead bug pose until the end of the 90s. It was always called dead bug. And then a few people started calling it happy baby. But so anyway, in that posture, the suggestion is take a deep breath in. And as you're exhaling, to sort of open your mouth and go, ha, 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 laughing out loud. And just that, and repeatedly. And this tends to create contagious laughter. Now, is that overdoing it with respect to encouraging a certain mood? Because we don't ever want to tell our students how or what to feel. We want them to feel what they are feeling. But I think we can do things in a class that do cultivate, encourage, facilitate lightness of feeling, including breath practices. I would suggest perhaps more than anything, pranayama practices that generate lightness of spirit and lightness of being, really beneficial. By the way, the laughing, when an infant laughs a lot, it's also developing its transverse abdominis muscle, the sort of girdle that wraps around the waist. It's a really important abdominal core muscle, the transversus erectus abdominis, I keep saying. It's also involved a little bit in laughing, but it's really transverse. And that muscle is so developed when babies laugh. So, and adults laugh. So it's why when you laugh so hard that your belly aches, at a party with your friends or something, you're feeling your transverse abdominis. You might, warrior two. It always looks so serious. I think it might be why it's called warrior. It's very serious. Sometimes I say you might play with letting the outer corners of your lips stretch towards your ears. Now, am I going too far and suggesting a way of feeling? Play with that one. So we don't, again, want to tell our students how to feel. I think that's not a good thing generally to do in life, to tell someone how to feel, but rather for everyone to appreciate how they are feeling and to recognize that, to honor that. And then at the same time, to hold the space in our classes that is about allowing more levity, appreciating the diversity of conditions in that class, of intentions in that class, including that is in being inclusive, the range of feelings and emotions that are always there in any given class with the diverse array of people who are actually there. Oh, a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was, I wrote the teacher's column for Yoga Journal Deutschland at that period of time, and Yoga Journal China. And I was asked by the Deutschland editors to write an article on self-love versus narcissism and to focus this on teachers. If you've been on the yoga path for very long, you've certainly encountered some rather narcissistic qualities out there among some yoga teachers and superstars. I won't mention any names, but you'll have your list probably. Narcissism, I can take, I don't have a problem with people being narcissistic as long as their narcissism doesn't create a problem for other people. Where it does become a problem for other people, then that becomes a problem for all of us, I suppose. And you might imagine a highly narcissistic yoga teacher and how that affects the space of a class, how that affects how others might feel, how students might feel in that class. Indeed, how other teachers in a community of teachers at a yoga studio, a shala, a school, or a gym, a fitness center, wherever you happen to teach, what it's like to be around teachers who are narcissistic. There's an important distinction between narcissism and self-love. Self-love, which is rooted in, I'll suggest, an abiding sense of self-acceptance, of self-recognition, getting to know yourself, a deeper self-knowledge, a deeper knowing. Jnana yoga brings us there. One of those Bhagavad Gita paths, jnana yoga, knowledge yoga, the yoga of knowledge. Self-knowledge, I suggest, is getting to know ourselves better, including through our yoga practices, including through everything that we do, getting to know ourselves better. And in getting to know ourselves better, to have a deepening sense of self-acceptance. Everyone deserves to love themselves. We are all potentially infinitely lovable and loving creatures, even though we might not feel that way or think that way. Oh, the fifth L, it's love. You can also think of it as the Anandamaya kosha, if you would like, the bliss kosha, the innermost. I would suggest not as the innermost, it's also the outermost. It's replete, it's there through it all, replete through it all. So having a sense of love allows us to have a quality with our students that I think is super important, and that is loving kindness. That we never say or do anything in a class that is in any way shaming. We're very aware of our lighthearted references and jokes and things like that, such that we don't ever, hey, we're human, we all make errors. I'll consider this an error. That is, if I say something that's offensive to someone, making a joke or some reference, I would want to learn from that experience, to hold the space of a class in a way that's more inclusive of people around these kinds of qualities, of them feeling their own love within themselves. There's a wonderful book I read recently, Rutger Bregman, a Dutch writer, titled Humankind. And it's a fascinating set of reflections on kind of the Hobbesian versus the Lockean world, and the suggestion that it has not been survival of the fittest that's gotten us here. So, that life is nasty, brutish, and short, was just the opposite. That what's really gotten us as humanity here, and yes, we have some challenges in the world, I get it, is the survival of the friendliest. The survival of the friendliest. And as a yoga teacher, holding the space in the class and being friendly, like consistently friendly, not by trying, but just by being the loving creature that you are, cultivating those qualities within yourself in every way, in every moment that you can, such that also you're always in that mood of friendliness and more likely to convey that energy to your students. I'll suggest that this is an important part of making that is loving kindness is an important part of helping to make our classes more inclusive. So wherever you are in the world, wherever you are in your yoga practice, wherever you are in your experience, your practice of teaching yoga, I think that all of us, whether you're entirely new, you're just getting onto that teaching path, you're presently in a yoga teacher training program, or you're an experienced teacher or a teacher trainer, it doesn't matter. We can all go farther in cultivating all of these qualities of inclusiveness, all of the 5 L's that I've given to you today, relating to language, to learning styles, to levels, to levity, and to love. And so with that, I think we're just about 50 minutes into this session today. And at this point, I believe that Shannon's going to reappear here. Hello again, Shannon. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. We're just going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the question section or the chat. Kicking things off, we have a question from Karen. Explain the no foot to knee theory. I've read different recently. Is it for the safety of weak knee?
Yes. Okay. So when the foot is placed against the knee, it depends on the person. As with every posture, there are some postures there are some people rather in the world who could do all kinds of, I'll call them crazy contortionist things with their body, and they'll be okay for like 108 lifetimes. And then there's sort of the rest of us, or at least a lot of us. And so there are some people whose robust qualities of their legs and their knee joints are such that that foot inside the knee is not going to be very impactful, that is potentially injurious. But the problem is that there are many of us for whom when we press the foot into the inner knee with the foot on the floor, you have a closed chain from the hip to the foot, and you're pressing that foot into the inner knee, it stresses the outer knee. The lateral collateral ligaments can get overstretched. And it also, if you already let's say you're over the age of 30, or you're a runner and you're even perhaps under 30, you might already have some issues with your meniscus, the cartilage, the sort of crescent moon shaped cartilage on both sides of the knee between the bottom of the femur and the top of the tibia. And that meniscus, it's specifically the medial meniscus that tends to get crunched a little bit when we press against the inner knee. So it's both the medial meniscus on the inner knee and the lateral collateral stabilizing ligaments on the outside of the knee that can get stressed with that pressure. And given that it's not necessary, that is, one could simply place their foot below the knee, or if available, above the knee, especially available below the knee for some people, I would encourage that. That said, if a student places their foot against their knee, I would counsel minimal pressure there. So I'm not going to give up the mandate of saying, don't ever do this to every person in the world, and say, well, you have your foot against your inner knee. Take it especially easy there and really tune into any sensations that are happening there, especially if you have knee issues.
Awesome. Another question from John. How would you adapt a private class for an amputee with a leg prosthesis?
Oh boy, lots of ways. And so assuming the prosthesis is on, this is from experience working with students with prostheses, leg prostheses. I would, as with every student, a private class, I would start with a conversation about their conditions and their intentions in that class. Depending on where that person is with their experience with the prosthesis, I'd want to understand what, if any, ongoing guidance they're getting from a physical therapist. Because if they have a prosthetic leg, they've definitely had attention from an orthopedic doctor, a surgeon, and from a physiotherapist or physical therapist in the US, who's given them guidance based on certain orthopedic and physical therapy protocols. And I want to honor those as best I can. It's what I did in this book that I happen to have sitting here as well, Yoga Therapy. It's like 720 pages. And what does it do with musculoskeletal ailments? It says, what are the PT protocols and what could yoga do to support those? And in some cases go beyond them, but not in ways that violate those protocols. So I'd want to understand that with that student. I want to understand a little bit more about what, again, their intentions are in that class. And then based on those conditions and intentions, and again, where they are overall in their body, I would then go about giving them a private class that would be really similar to any other private class that I would give. And you can see now, especially with things like the Paralympics, there are people with prosthetic legs that are extraordinary athletes and all kinds of sports. And there are also people with prosthetic legs that are just learning to walk, or relearning to walk. And so what are their conditions? Very much like any other private yoga class I'm going to give. And by the way, when I give privates, which I rarely do anymore, I would always give two basic different kinds of privates. One is give just an overall practice, like just guide a student through the practice. I give them a class, if you will. The other approach is sort of workshopping it, really focus. So like today we're going to focus on the shoulder girdle, or today we're going to focus on abdominal twist, or whatever it happens to be. So give them those decisions, conversing with that student. That's how I would proceed. I would do definitely with some more of a yoga therapy thing. I'd follow chapter 18 and 19 in this book and get deeply into doing a deeper assessment. And with that, a therapeutic treatment plan that's based on that assessment that client student is fully engaged in and supportive. It's their plan.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark.
I
have a question from Heather. Any tips for learning to teach off the mat with less demonstration? The mat is my safe space, but I know I need to move off of it.
Yes, number one, breathe. Just breathe. I know it sounds simplistic, but like I get it too. By the way, when I first started teaching, I was on my mat. I had my little cheat sheet in my back pocket. I'd ask my students to come into child's pose so they couldn't see me. I'd look at the piece of paper to remember my sequence or remember certain cues. It was like, it was 28 years ago or something. I eventually weaned myself of that. It was hard for me personally to get off my mat initially. I think it's a good sign, usually, actually. I think it means you care. And the fear that arises in teaching, I think, arises from a place of caring about our students. So to get there, to take those steps, I suggest baby steps. Just start to play with this. You've gotten your students into a certain form. Let's say maybe you're teaching a sun salutation, and now your class is in downward facing dog. You might take a couple of breaths, like stay on your mat, but now they can't see you. They're looking the other direction, right? They're in down dog. Get off your mat. Even if it's not going to go look any differently at them or touch or give adjustments, just get off your mat, like walk off your mat. See what that feels like. And then to play with practice with saying maybe a cue for the next movement. Inhale your right leg up behind you. Exhale, step forward, you hop back to your mat and show that form. You're taking them in, whatever it is. But try to find little ways to start getting off your mat. And little by little by little, I'll call them baby steps, little by little, you're more comfortable getting off your mat. Let it be a practice of your own. We'll call it vinyasa krama, gradual progression, a key concept in sequencing, gradual progression from being on your safe zone, on that mat to getting out there.
Awesome. We only have time for a couple more questions. So if we have a question from Leah come in, what are the tips you can provide to teach mirroring the posture if we have never taught with reverse direction to our own?
Good. Well, first and foremost, to thine own self be true. Practice in a way that feels comfortable for you now, and start to play with little by little, bringing in other qualities to your teaching. And this goes for a teacher who's been teaching yoga for a quarter century. Keep refining, keep developing. And so with mirroring, for example, or specifically, start simple. Maybe you've asked your class to step to the side of their mat. They're looking to the side of the room, and you go over there and you practice at home, and you say, turn your right foot out, and you turn your left foot out. In my teacher trainings, we do this a lot, and that's where the participants, the teacher trainees, are developing that. I'll call it. It's a skill. It is a skill, and for some, it is really difficult, and for some, it seems more natural. Maybe they have a dance background or something. I don't know. Maybe they're dyslexic, and it's helpful. So I think this, find those baby steps to little by little get at it. I want to suggest, by the way, and I have more I can share about that, this gradual progression steps to get more comfortable with that. My direct email address is mark@markstevensyoga.com. Any other questions, whether you send them to beYogi, you can also send an email directly to me and say, what about this and what about that? I'd be happy to engage with you. Or if there's a chat room thing I can reply to that's a community forum or something within beYogi, I'd be happy to provide answers to questions there in your portal, however all y'all want to roll with that. But I'd like to be able to respond to everyone's questions. I always try to. Please email me or send them through, if I can say that. I don't know, Shannon, through beYogi. Yes,
Yeah,
she's saying double thumbs
definitely.
up. Great. I'd be happy to respond.
Wonderful. And I also dropped your website and I dropped your email as well in the chat. So if anyone has any further questions, definitely feel free to reach out to Mark, or you can definitely reach out to anyone on the beYogi team. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Awesome. Well,
Beautiful.
thank you so much, Mark, for this informative webinar. And thank you for coming back as our guest host. And happy National Yoga Month.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you to beYogi and all of you participants who are here today. Namaste. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao. Tschüss. Chin chin. Adios.